Hi, and thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Right, so I'm going to share with you a deep dive I did into the child F case. This was in the first week of September of last year, and what it'll show you is how this this the how they fabricated this gateway case on which all the other 21 cases would it would essentially subsequently be based. I have to warn you, it's quite tough going, and unfortunately, it's going to be another longish one. But I hope you can get something from it. I'm doing it because for the reason I just stated, but also because it's like I I put a lot of work into digesting this, and then not just digesting it, but digesting it and then typing the 5 or 6 pages. I actually did this. This is again something that was posted on the Science and Trial website. Briefly, how that came about was that at the outset, when I first signed up, applied to the project and signed up at the end of August, or got yeah of last year, the plan of action seemed to be that people are going to be split off into teams with a kind of team leader, and we would all be to picking through the cases, the 22 cases, looking to find things on which they could be challenged. That's not really how it worked out, but that seemed to be the plan of action. And I remember it was stated that we should all use the same source of transcripts for the 22 cases, that being a website called Tattle Life. That's Tattle. I believe the cases are probably still there. This is the only one I did. But how I came to do this was that having got that information, I think I seem to recall, given the name of someone who was going to be the kind of coordinator for my little group, like nothing happened for a couple of days. So I thought what I'd do is I'd get ahead of the game by going on this website and actually reading up on one of these cases to see if there was anything I could see. I chose this one because for they themselves, some of you might recall, some of you will, I'm sure, recall seeing the Panorama episode on the case that was broadcast on the 24th of August, 6 days after the verdict, 24th of August 2023. I watched it, and one of the big things, they actually were upfront about it. They came out and said that the child F case, which was one of the attempts, at the time, the 7, yeah, is that right? Yeah, 7 attempts that she'd been convicted of, that this was the kind of breakthrough case. So essentially, this child F case seemed like it was the foundation stone for the whole thing. So for that reason, I thought, well, any flaws in it would not only kind of like go towards undermining this particular case, but if it, as they said, it's the kind of foundation, their breakthrough, then it couldn't be good for the overall structure of the 22 cases. And just to give a bit of background, that the Panorama program featured a number of detectives from the investigation team, all very self-congratulatory, I'm sure you'll recall, those of you who saw it, and also staff from the Countess of Chester Hospital, including that Stephen Brearey, who was the head, or is, I believe he still is, the head of the neonatal unit there, one of the 4 consultants. one of the crying consultants. I'm going to come to that at some point in the future too. Not today, but I will have something to say about that. So in this program, it's like you kind of had a voiceover going on, and so the voiceover kind of comes over and says, to quote, I quote, "One case convinced police that there was a murderer in the hospital, close quotations, child F." In the supporting interview to that statement, straight after it, a female detective came on screen and stated as follows: "The insulin cases were a milestone in the investigation," close quotations. Stephen Brearey then appeared on camera, giving information that early in 2018 he had been reviewing child F's case notes for the police when he noticed an abnormal insulin result from a blood test of the boy, which a junior doctor who apparently reviewed the case at the time had failed to see the significance of. Brearey then goes on to say that on that basis he was able to direct the police that the child had been poisoned. Really don't know what he, as an interested party, was doing directing the police when the police had actually brought on board their own team of medical experts like 7 months before. But there it is. So, moving on, this poisoner necessarily had to have had access to both the poisoned child and the locked fridge containing the insulin. Miss Letby and unnamed nurse 2, who was child F's actual official case nurse that night, were the only nurses working room 2 that night. In light of her unfortunate track record of having come to notice as the nurse who was at present at most more catastrophic collapses than any other, such that Dr. Brearey and the other consultants had felt obliged to have her removed from the unit, you can well imagine that it would not have taken Cheshire Constabulary too long to decide which of the 2 nurses was going to be their suspect for the poisoning. The poisoning a medical expert, Dr. Brearey, in their eyes, had told them was a certain fact. So just to be clear, at that point, the police investigation had been ongoing since May 2017. So that's 9 months. Over some 9 months then, Cheshire Constabulary and their own medical experts, which they brought in the July of 2017, had failed to establish any basis to suspect Miss Letby of wrongdoing in the spike of deaths on the unit. So in light of those many months of achieving nothing, the only reasonable explanation for the spectacular success which subsequently happened in the case against Miss Letby on the same set of clinical facts is this: detectives now had an attempted murder and a suspect within the unit. That suspected person's relatively short time on the unit had also coincided with a spike in deaths. For the police, putting those 2 facts together gave them a murderer on the neonatal unit. It was now just a question of tying up loose ends by establishing the how of the actual murders and on successful attempts. As such, guided by their own, the experts they themselves are brought in, the police this is, and the likes of Dr. Brearey and presumably the other consultants, Cheshire Constabulary set about reverse engineering plausible methodologies whereby their murderer could be made to account for as many of the deaths and other collapses in the unit as possible. Basically, a clinical scavenger hunt within the constraints of Miss Letby's duties and the circumstances within the neonatal unit. Okay, I've got a heading now: the case against Miss Letby. This next several paragraphs, it's actually just just an overview, just a kind of summary, just to show you where we're going to be going. So don't, as you listen to me speak, don't feel like stuff's going over your head or flying past you. Everything I mention here, which is of significance, I'll be coming back to. This is just an overview. The case against Miss Letby is that someone poisoned child F with insulin by putting it into the intravenous nutrient feed bag he was connected to at 00:25 hours on the 5th of August 2015. So that's just before midnight on the day. And the person also spiked a second nutrient feed bag to which the child would be connected almost 12 hours later at noon on the 5th of August 2015. Of course, by that time, Lucy had gone off duty fully 4 hours before that. As you will see, though, as I go further into this, that fact that Miss Letby had gone off duty 4 hours before this second bag was attached to the child, was connected to the child, that wasn't so much as a speed bump for the prosecution's case in court, which is one of the interesting facts about this. Anyway, these nutrient bags, their actual name for them is Total Parenteral Nutrition, or TPN for short. And what it is a method of feeding a patient, whether it's a newborn baby, as in this case, or an adult in intensive care. It's a method of feeding that bypasses the gastrointestinal tract, bypasses the stomach. A special formula with all the nutrients the body needs is given through a vein, and as I said, providing all the nutrients the body needs. And obviously this is a method used when a person can't or shouldn't take feedings or fluids by mouth. It's basically the kind of intravenous drip that you often see by the hospital bed of critical patients in intensive cares, in intensive care on films and TV hospital programs. So, as I said, I'm just doing a summary on the actual police case against Miss Letby here. So, Miss Letby was accused and subsequently unanimously, one of the only 3 unanimous verdicts, convicted of being that person, the person who had spiked the first nutrient bag and all that the child was connected to, and also the one which the child was connected to like 4 hours after Lucy actually went off duty. So she was convicted of being that person because for 2 reasons. A, she was one of only 2 nurses with direct access to child F and the locked fridge in which both the nutrient feed bags and the insulin, which the prosecution claimed was used to spike them, were stored. And B, the court was persuaded that Miss Letby possessed a malevolence towards the babies not shared by the nurse she was working with that night or any other member of staff on the unit. That first feedback, the one from the night, was one specially prepared for child F, which either Lucy or the other nurse connected to the baby, as I said, just before midnight on the 5th. To make its case, the prosecution was able to persuade the jury that although the second bag was one of 5 generic TPN bags on standby in the fridge for special operational contingencies, and Lucy could have had no way of knowing that the first one, the actual one that was prescribed for the child at nighttime bag might actually end up being discarded, partially used. She could have had no way of knowing that, because those bags they generally last, I believe, at least 24, possibly as much as 48 hours. So although she couldn't have had any way of predicting that the bag, what she's supposed to have spiked, would be disconnected from the child, she had she had nevertheless taken it upon herself to spike the one that another nurse, which we'll come to, connected to the child at noon, 4 hours after Lucy herself had gone off duty. And well, actually not just that bag, but in order to cover the fact that that nurse had a choice of 5 bags in the fridge to take, the prosecution boilerplated itself by saying, yeah, she must have, just to take chance out of it, that she must have spiked all 5 of them. Yeah, this and what that's a good illustration of the confirmation bias that's like that runs through all 22 cases, like the name running through the Blackpool Rock or something, you know, like it's, and as I said, and they actually admitted in that Panorama program, this was their first case, the first point where they had their gotcha, you know, we have criminal activity. Everything else, all the other 21 cases, they were built because they thought they decided that they had this one case, they had a murderer, an attempted murderer, so this attempted murderer must have done all the other ones too. It was just a question of finding suitable ways that the murderer could have done them, ways that a jury would accept. So yeah, just to finish this bit, the actual prosecution case, the case on which she was convicted. The medical facts on which Lucy was convicted are that child F's blood sugar remained equally low for the periods on the 2 different nutrient feed bags. The periods are the time from the first one being connected at just before midnight until mid-morning on the 5th of that day, the 5th of August. And then the period from the second one being connected at noon, a couple of hours later, on the 5th of August until I believe 6 o'clock in the evening, or maybe a little bit later. The child stabilized at 9, but it's those 2 periods. Essentially, the medical facts are that the child's blood sugar remained low during both of those periods, and the reason the child's blood sugar level was low was because the child was in the course of being poisoned by insulin, which Miss Letby had introduced into the child's body via the child's feed bag. So, and yes, when a blood sample was taken at just before 6 o'clock and sent away for testing, that's just before 6 o'clock in the evening. So we're talking now 10 hours after Miss Letby went off duty. I'm not sure why they waited until then, but you know, they took a sample, sent it off. The result came back with a reading of 4,657 of whatever units they used to measure insulin. So that was the insulin level, 4,657, and an insulin test like this always features 2 readings: the insulin reading and a a reading for a hormone called C-peptide. The C-peptide is a hormone the body produces when, as a, I don't know, some kind of protection for the body when the body produces insulin. So if a reading is going to come back with, if a reading is going to be high for insulin, then if there will be, then there will also be a spike in the body's in the reading for the body's level of C-peptide hormone at the same time, proving that the insulin was actually, or that fact, the fact of the spike in the hormone at the same time is, if you like, more or less conclusive proof that the insulin was produced by the body. If the body does insulin, it also has to, it also produces C-peptide, extra C-peptide. So yeah, the reading came back, the results rather of that blood test from the blood sample taken at just before 6 came back with a high, a reading of 4,657 for insulin, but which, though high, wouldn't have been problematic if the actual C-peptide reading at 169 only had not been so low. Basically, what Gibbs, the consultant who'd been on that night, told the court was that the such an insulin reading at that level would imply a C-peptide reading 5 to 10 times higher, greater than the 169. So essentially, that C-peptide level was consistent with a thesis that synthetic insulin had been introduced into the child's body to do him harm. Right. Okay, so that is what the prosecution was, the police and the prosecution was able to sell to the court to secure this like critical conviction. Well, it wasn't, it's less of a critical conviction, but to secure this particular conviction, because of course by this time you already got the other 21 cases, so it wouldn't have made any difference if this one had been one of the ones that where she'd been found not guilty, or no decision had been made. The other ones, you know, I think you know where I'm going. It was critical at the beginning because it gave them the justification for jumping to making some real leaps of faith in building the other cases. They would not have made those leaps of faith, the leaps of faith that made it possible to make the other 21 cases, if they hadn't been certain, based on what on Dr. Brearey telling them that this was conclusive evidence of a poisoner. Yeah, so they had a murderer in the unit. So, you know, a murderer kills people. There'd been a spike in deaths. So if there's a murderer, the murderer must have been the one killing them. So, you know, they went about it. Okay, so my next section heading, what happened? I'll now talk through the sequence of events, the facts from which the police kind of like kind of extracted their case. They didn't just extract, you know, they kind of like, as I said, there's much about this case which is fabricated, but These are the facts anyway. So, on the night of 4th to 5th August 2015, Miss Letby was performing a night duty in room 2 of the neonatal unit in company with one other nurse, unnamed nurse 2. Unclear why she couldn't be named in court. Well, you know, I mean, I always used to think that part of the reason why a person's words would be accepted in court, especially as a prosecution witness, was the fact that that person was willing to underwrite their words by revealing their identity. So it's kind of amazing to me, because this isn't the only person. There are other people rather, on the prosecution side, who are able to give anonymous, what amounts to anonymous evidence. You know, anyway. That night, Miss Letby is on duty, a team of 2 in this particular room with this unnamed nurse 2. That other nurse was the one that actually had formal kind of like care responsibility for child F, while Miss Letby had another child. But it appears that the nurses kind of helped each other and worked on each other's babies as necessary. At that time, child F was about 5 days old, and it's not clear, but he may have been on normal nutrition, as in milk, whether it's mother's milk or some other kind of milk previously. But at that time, was receiving his nutrients intravenously from the TPN bag. Now, there are 2 types of these TPN bags. It's not complicated. One type is the primary one. It's based on a prescription which is specific to an individual child, the nutrient needs of the individual child rather, and that prescription is delivered to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy then produces and makes up that bag and delivers it back to the unit. So that's the one type. The other type is an off-the-shelf generic kind of TPN bag, which is a nutrient bag, which is on standby for use in not emergencies, but in operational contingencies where there's a fail in relation to the actual bespoke prescription bag, because obviously, you know, only one of them gets made up. So if something goes wrong with it, then especially at night or something, then the baby must be fed some other way. So the way it works is the child specific one is delivered to the neonatal unit at 4 p.m. each day. That's obviously if it's ordered in time. And along with that, there is always an inventory of 5 of those generic bags in the same locked fridge where the prescription TPN bag and other things, including insulin, is stored. The facts given the court was that a prescription for a TPN bag for child F was sent to the pharmacy during the daytime on the 4th of August, and the bag was duly delivered to the unit at 4 p.m. obviously some hours before Miss Letby came on for her night duty. 8 hours and 25 minutes later, at 12:25 a.m., the unit log for the administering of these nutrient bags showed that Miss Letby and this unnamed colleague, unnamed nurse 2, co-signed as connecting child F to his prescription TPN bag via the intravenous long line. Neither nurse contests that they co-signed the log, but neither can recall which of them actually physically hung the bag. Just to backtrack slightly, at 11:32 p.m., as in 53 minutes before the bag connecting event, the child's blood sugar level was observed at 5.5. I'm not sure 5.5 what, but 5.5. Professor Hindmarsh, one of the prosecution's experts, told the court that anything over 3.5 is okay, meaning that below that level, below 3.5, is indicative of hypoglycemia. So then the next check on child F's blood sugar level was about an hour and a half later at 1:54 a.m. That was the beginning of this of the problems, so to speak, because it showed that the child's blood sugar level had plummeted to 0.8. That then was the first evidence of what Hindmarsh later told the court, described to the court as a 17-hour hypoglycemic episode for child F. During the period, that 17-hour period, the child was given dextrose boosters, the first being administered at 2:20 a.m., roughly half an hour after this first troubling blood sugar reading. And so at 2:20 a.m. the child gets the first dextrose booster in response to that very low blood sugar count. And from then until the child eventually normalized on the evening, some 17 hours later, 2.9 was the highest recorded blood sugar level of about 10 of them. Miss Letby went off duty at 8 a.m. and at that time the child's blood sugar level was 1.7. Going deeper into the morning now, a couple of hours after Miss Letby had gone off duty, fluids, including the intravenous feed to child F, were temporarily discontinued. That was at 10 a.m. because of a problem with the apparatus. There's no further details of that. But at 10 a.m. the child's disconnected from the TPN bag. At 11 a.m. a doctor decided to address the child's ongoing low blood sugar issue by putting him on an exclusively dextrose only feed. So again, same setup, except that rather than the bag being a TPN one containing a cocktail of nutrients, you've just got a bag with just one type of nutrient, sugar, so I think dextrose is. So 1 hour later now, at noon on the 5th of August, after the child had been on the dextrose feed for 1 hour, the child was put back on a TPN nutrient bag via the long line as at 12:30 in the night, on this occasion by a new nurse, unnamed nurse 1. So we now have a second nurse who, for whatever reason, is able to give evidence in court without revealing her identity. In her evidence, she stated that the original long line had tissued, which isn't explained, but I take to mean there's been some kind of development which affected the free flow of the fluid through it, and it having developed this issue therefore had to be replaced. So obviously a decision has also been made between 11 and 12 noon, presumably by the same doctor who made that dextrose decision for 11 o'clock, a decision was made that the child was now stable enough to be put back on the standard TPN nutrients bag. So that operation was conducted by unnamed nurse 1. She then gave further evidence that she was unable to recollect whether or not she changed the TPN bag as well as put in a new long line, the plastic tube connecting the child to the nutrient bag. But the nurse states that replacing the bag as well would be her normal practice in that situation. Further, hospital policy is also that in the event of a nurse needing to replace a long line in a situation like this, the nurse should also always replace the TPN bag. So while the nurse was unable to recollect fully whether or not she had also changed the TPN bag, she's telling the court that, well, it's what she would normally do, and on top of that, it's hospital policy. So it is it's reasonable to take it to be the case that this nurse, unnamed nurse 1, replaced the original prescription TPN bag, which Miss Letby and her night duty colleague, unnamed nurse 2, had connected to the child, replaced it with one of the 5 generic off-the-shelf bags kept in the fridge for these contingencies. At the time of the connection of this new bag, noon, the child's blood sugar level was recorded as 2.4. It was then checked 2 hourly up to 6 p.m., reading 1.9 on each occasion. Now, just before the last of those checks, 4 minutes before, in fact, a blood sample was taken from the child and sent away for analysis to another location. And this event brings into the picture a new medical profession whose work goes some way, well, not just some way, but totally undermines Dr. Brearey's claim that he was the one that his claim that the irregularity, this possible synthetic insulin poisoning, was first noticed in February of 2018, and also refutes, well, goes some way to challenging his information, the information he gives. He states that he gave to the police, well, we know he gave to the police, that it was conclusive evidence of poisoning. You'll need to bear with me, but certainly she definitely kind of refutes her documented work, her own words in the report, in sending the results of her test on the blood sample back to the hospital, included words which refute Dr. Brearey's claim that he was the one who picked up this thing 30 months later. And the tone and the way she went about raising the concern, which you'll come to see she did, does not support an idea in her mind, and she's the real expert here, not him, does not support that she had some sense or any sense that that there was a poisoner at work. You'll see what I mean when we come to it shortly. But so yeah, here we are. This sample is sent away to the local lab, and this person I've been talking about, a clinical biochemist, Dr Anna Milan, or Milan, is the one who tests it, she tests it for synthetic insulin. Or I don't know, maybe she tested it for lots of stuff. It didn't really say, but the upshot is that she sends the results she sends back of her tests on this blood sample from child F. The results she sends back to the hospital gives an insulin reading of 4,657 and an associated C-peptide reading of 169. It's not clear whether there were also that these set of results included other sort of measurements from the blood sample, but certainly the insulin and C-peptide were there. Now, the results document includes a place for comments. Her recorded comments on the results document were as follows: open quotation marks, question mark, exogenous with a capital E, close quotation marks, followed by a second comment. Before moving on to the second comment, clearly this is shorthand. She's asking the question, is this possible? Are these two results, the way they compare, the ratio here between the insulin and the C-peptide? Excuse me. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so Dr Milan or Milan, she's queried to the neonatal unit whether or not this insulin reading is evidence of synthetic insulin being introduced to the child's body. Her second comment is as follows: open quotation marks, suggest send sample to Guildford for exogenous insulin, close quotation marks. Clearly what she's saying there is that's a shorthand. Send to that particular lab, the Guildford lab is the one where court standard, where more precise, I think they obviously have a more rigorous, more stringent testing there, which is evidenced by the fact that, for example, actual Home Office policy is, which was departed from clearly in this case, is that the readings that Dr Milan or Milan produced should not are not capable of supporting a prosecution or a conviction. That only the equivalent produced by the Guildford lab is suitable, is capable of being used for a criminal conviction, which I'm not suggesting that Dr. Milan had a criminal prosecution in mind here. This is just in all she's doing here is, she knows that what she does is essentially just in what they might call an assay, or it's more of a ballpark assessment of the chemical attributes, if you like, of the blood, and in the event of finding anything slightly untoward, then clearly it's appropriate to have a more precise test just to see whether or not there really is any issue. I think you get where I'm going with that. So she, as I said, she's put the comments possible exogenous, as in possible synthetic insulin in effect here. Send it off to the big lab to have it tested, which, if you haven't worked, just to remind you, that clearly contradicts what Brearey gave as the explanation on Panorama of how he came to realize that the baby had been poisoned with insulin, because he's saying that, February 2018, I just happened to be looking over these and I noticed this result for the first time, and based on my experience, I can see clear as day this baby has been poisoned. Whereas the reality of it is, the actual result that came back to the lab 30 months before mentioned the possibility that on the ratio between the insulin and the C-peptide, the possibility of the presence of synthetic insulin, and advised, check it, but nothing more. So Dr. Milan or Milan had flagged the possibility and gave the advice which the unit then disregarded. Now, moving on, in addition to raising the question of whether Dr. Brearey was being economical with the truth in describing the breakthrough on Panorama, and if so, why, there was a further consideration of the strong contrast in their reactions to the insulin reading of 4657 against the C-peptide reading of only 169. For Dr. Milan, she's an independent medical professional outside of the febrile atmosphere of the Countess of Chester Consultants group. For her, the ratio of these readings the ratio of the readings is enough of an anomaly to justify further investigation, but clearly nothing extreme in a blood sample. That's an inference, but I think it's an inference which can be safely made from the fact of the tone of her comments. The fact that she simply chose to comment in the standard way on the results log, rather than, say, immediately getting on the phone to the Countess of Chester to say, you've got a poisoner going on or something, check that baby out or whatever. The fact that she's happy to just make her comment and her recommendation on the standard results log rather than doing that And the fact, crucially, that she isn't sufficiently concerned to actually follow up the advice, the suggestions she'd made on the results log, on the results log. You know, she doesn't follow it up on the results log. She suggests it, and that's it. She leaves it. She has nothing. She takes no further interest in it. Yeah. So she wasn't to know that they didn't choose to send it off to Guildford for full analysis. It wasn't that important, clearly. So she is the expert, but Dr. Brearey, on the other hand, he would have us believe that the mere fact of two such readings for insulin and C-peptide in the same sample is prima facie evidence of an insulin poisoner at work. So, you know, who are you going to believe? Are you going to believe the person who deals with this stuff on a day-to-day basis, the person whose speciality it is to make such calls, or are you going to believe someone who is a pediatrician? He's a specialist there, but he's not a specialist in this stuff. So, but he's kind of held himself out to the police as this specialist. He hasn't like said, "Hey, let me check this with some colleague of mine who specializes, who's a biochemist," or, you know, the obvious, go back to the original biochemist, Dr Milan. No, he's turned round and said to the police, "This is definitive, this is conclusive proof. You got a poisoner." Yeah, in an area which is not his expertise. Okay, so further to that, it's also my understanding that the manufacturers of synthetic insulin are required to leave a distinctive chemical footprint in the insulin, in their kind of insulin, so that any synthetic insulin can always be sourced back to its manufacturer. If Dr. Milan's advice to send the sample to Guildford had been followed, not only would it have confirmed whether or not the insulin was synthetic, but also, crucially for this case, whether it was the same make of synthetic insulin as that which is kept in the neonatal unit. As I said, you know, the judge also let it slide that only Guildford standard readings are acceptable for convicting someone. Anyway, moving on. The next section now, how the case against Miss Letby was created, because sure, it certainly was created. Now, an argument can be made that the prosecution outperformed in getting one of its three, unanimous verdicts on this case, as the report, the transcript in Tattle Life, gives the impression that they very much winged it at times by hypothesizing different scenarios for the way Miss Letby could have poisoned child F with the insulin. And with in that area, pretty much their expert witness, Professor Hindmarch, pretty much gave the jury a kind of mashup of different TPN bag possibilities based on, one, whether the same bag was used throughout the 17 or 19 hour period until the child normalized, and two, whether it was changed at noon, and three, if the bag had been changed at noon, whether both of the bags involved were clean, sorry, both of the bags involved had been spiked, or the one from noon was actually clean. In addition, the witnesses, the prosecution witnesses, weren't even always on the same page. You know, Professor Hindmarsh, for example, in his sort of TPN mashup scenarios, covered the possibility of the noon TPN bag being new and uncontaminated, but gave the hypothesis covering that particular scenario or eventuality with the it gave the hypothesis that although the TPN bag hadn't been spiked, or the fluid was uncontaminated, the long line from the bag to the child would have still had residual insulin from the night time, from the first prescription TPN bag, and that for him, he would have the court believe that would explain how it was that an unspiked bag could still result in an outcome where the child's blood sugar levels remained low. So the point I'm making is, in the transcript of this case, it shows that the prosecution witnesses weren't always on the same page on things, because the Professor Hindmarsh is coming up with a scenario here where to cover a situation which couldn't happen in practice. He's making this he's doing this because he doesn't actually know, he doesn't have full knowledge of the operational procedures. The fact that an interruption to the child being connected to a TPN bag would result in a new long line, a new intravenous line being connected up. He assumes that he's made the assumption that the same intravenous line would have been used for the new bag, just because by making that assumption he's able to maintain his thesis that Miss Letby has put a system in place which has been capable of delivering poisonous insulin, like extra insulin for poisonous purposes, delivering to this child's body for the whole period from when she was on duty, from midnight the night before, well, from the beginning of the day in the middle of the night, all the way through until the evening of the same day, to be fair, 17 hours. So moving forward, once Brearey decided to present the insulin and C-peptide readings as prima facie evidence of deliberate insulin poisoning at a time when Lucy was on duty and therefore in play, it was simply a matter of working out a plausible delivery method in all the circumstances. I think we can be fairly confident that if it was not the case that insulin was actually kept in the unit, in that fridge, the same fridge as the TPN bags, we can be fairly confident that the prosecution, in that case, prosecution's case rather, in that scenario would have been that Lucy had somehow obtained the insulin like somewhere else and smuggled it into work on the night of the 4th going into the 5th in order to use it to poison the child. I mean, that's how their logic works. Evidently in this, because that's the kind of decision making they do. And really, if in terms of how the police go about their business, it's like that is, to be fair, how the investigative process works. Once you have a suspect, you find credible solutions to the problems of convincing a jury of guilt. You can ask any policeman that, if you speak to an honest one. Okay, this is this couple of paragraphs slightly heavy, but it's not essential to really grasping everything. It's just if you don't get it, it's not really that important. Basically, in the testimony to the court of Professor Hindmarch, he makes the point that insulin cannot be introduced to the body by mouth or from the stomach. To get it into the bloodstream, it must be injected under the skin or introduced intravenously. He also stated that there are two types of synthetic insulin available. Fast-acting, which is active within 30 minutes of it being introduced into the body, but effective for only 4 to 6 hours before it's kind of flushed out. And the second type, which is long-acting synthetic insulin, which remains effective in the body for 12 to 24 hours. Now, long-acting, the second variety of synthetic insulin, according to Hindmarch to the court, is not generally used for intravenous infusions. Consistent with that, the insulin in the room 2 fridge was exclusively the fast-acting variety. This is important now, that variety is exclusively, that type of insulin is delivered exclusively only by injections rather than via the long line, for one practical reason, a very important practical reason. That reason is that the long line is an unreliable and inefficient delivery method, because the properties of the insulin and the plastic means that the insulin tends to bind or stick to the plastic of the bag instead of flowing through the tube into the body of the patient as it's meant to. That's the only thing you really need to take away from this fact that it's fast-acting insulin what was in use exclusively in the neonatal unit, and for fast-acting insulin in the long line intravenous delivery was never, as a matter of policy, was never used, because it is inefficient. It's not a good way to do it, because the insulin, you can't guarantee that all of it will get to the person's body, the patient's body. Okay, moving on. The fact of only fast-acting insulin being available presented a challenge to the case team of police and medical professions, because the child F hypoglycemic episode is documented at 17 hours. The problem, as I said, fast-acting insulin is effective for 4 to 6 hours. So the fact that only the fast-acting type was available in the unit means that it would imply the need for a new injection of insulin every 4 to 5 hours. But given that Miss Letby actually went off duty 12 hours before the child normalized, so less than halfway through the hypoglycemic episode, then that would undermine their fast. Well, not undermine it, clearly it didn't, but that's a problem for their fast acting, for the theory that they're going to use to get this girl prosecuted. So that left them only one option for delivery of the poisoning insulin by Miss Letby. As I said, there are two delivery methods for insulin: injection or via the intravenous long line. The one is out because Miss Letby is not present, and even with a sympathetic cord, they're not gonna. You can't. Even a sympathetic cord isn't gonna accept that someone's like introducing injections when they're like, when the child is in hospital and they are off duty at home. So they have only the option they're going to have Lucy as their poisoner. They have only the option of delivery by from the TPN bag. So they base the case against Miss Letby on the theoretically sound idea that she somehow successfully circumvents the practical challenge of maintaining a life-threatening level of insulin in the child's body while she's off duty by mixing it into the child's nutrient feed bag for a steady, metered delivery of the poison. The advantage of that particular solution for them is that it also minimizes their suspect's risk of detection, and both the synthetic insulin and the nutrient bag are kept in the same place. The fridge being a place where she is one of only two people with unchallengeable access at the relevant time during the night. So without this idea of the spiked nighttime nutrient bags, there is no child F case against Miss Letby. Therefore, the case team ran with it. As may already be apparent, doing so involved willfully disregarding the implications for their thesis of the reality of the unreliability of insulin delivery by this method, this long line from the TPN bag method. On the face of it, testimony that the prescription TPN nutrient bag from Miss Letby's shift was almost certainly replaced by one of the 5 generic nutrient bags represents a credibility challenge to the prosecution of to the prosecution's case against Miss Letby. It's one thing to say that the attempted murderer spiked a feed bag with the child's name on it, knowing it was destined to be given to the child shortly, and quite something else to say that she also took the precaution of spiking all 5 of the standby nutrient bags located in the fridge, just on the off chance that they might need to be used, despite having no reason to expect them to be used to be connected to the child. Surprisingly though, the judge, Mr. Justice Goss, and the members of the jury appeared to be satisfied that the development was covered by the fact that Professor Hindmarsh's boilerplate possibilities had included one, that a stock bag, a generic nutrient bag, used at noon may have also been contaminated by Lucy in advance, as in the night before. I mean, to sum it up, basically the prosecution's starting position was that the prescription nutrient bag had been spiked. When later on testimony was given that a different nutrient bag should and probably was connected to the child at noon, they just effectively turned around and said to the court, she must have spiked that one too. And the court accepted this. Right, as I said, I certainly it was going to be a long one, and it certainly was, but we're at the end now. Just a couple of quick points. The two most obvious takeaways from this child F case are as follows. Right, as stated, TPN bags are not used as a delivery method for insulin because they are inefficient, and as such they're unreliable. That's something that will be true whether the insulin is being delivered for a legitimate purpose or in order to do harm, as the prosecution was able to successfully argue in this case. Now, the child's blood sugar readings across the whole hyperglycemic episode they're all fairly constant, apart from the very low one of 0.8, the one that alerted the team that there was a problem, that being the one at 1:54 in the morning. Apart from that one, if we exclude the very high one of 2.9 at 5 in the morning, they're all around 2. They're all around the 2 point whatever mark, 2, 1.9, 1.7. Yeah, there's a 1.4 and a 1.3. But we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the we've got 4 at 1.9, we've got 1 at 2.3, we've got 1 at 2.4, 1 at 1.7. So what I'm getting at is they're all fairly, across the 17-hour period, there's a total of total of 12 readings, and across those 17 hours. And over those 12 readings, as I said, if we take out the very lowest and the very highest, the blood sugar levels don't fluctuate greatly. And this is especially true during the afternoon period. So what those readings show, despite the fact that that they are low and problematic, those readings are consistent with a steady metered flow of the insulin into the child's body. But we know that such a flow could not have happened because the insulin injected into a TPN bag sticks or binds to the plastic. That would mean, that scientific fact means that what we would really be expecting to see if the prosecution argument was correct, what we would be expecting to see in these blood sugar readings, especially in the afternoon, would be erratic, jumpy ones, reflecting the fact that at the time of one reading, perhaps the insulin was flowing through well, and at another time there wasn't much insulin flowing through because it was binding to the plastic of either the bag or the tube. So that's what would be more consistent with what they're arguing. But what we actually get is evidence of a steady flow of insulin, if insulin there really was. And a further point on that, they're arguing that the second bag would have been spiked in the middle of the night, the generic bag, so that the insulin would have been sat in that one for hours and hours. So the flow through of the insulin from that bag would always be even more problematic. You would expect to see even more erratic readings during the afternoon, as that insulin had been sat in the nutrient bag for hours and hours, during which the binding process to the plastic could have only accelerated, was losing more and more insulin from the actual availability for throughput to the child's body. So that's the one takeaway. The other is that I'm not a medical expert, but I would hazard an educated guess that a clinical biochemist is a greater expert on insulin than a consultant pediatrician. On that basis, the reaction of Dr. Milan to her findings of insulin at 4657 and versus C-peptide at 169 would appear to be the more reliable one than that of Dr. Brearey's, engaging just how extraordinary those figures were in the greater scheme of things. Dr. Milan's documented behavior, however, does not suggest that she viewed those two results as the basis for a murder inquiry. As I said, she just used the standard way, the comments section of the results log, to flag up the anomaly. She suggested sending it off, but didn't even bother chasing up whether or not her suggestion had been followed through on. But, and as I said, she's the expert. Dr. Brearey, on the other hand, what he does, well, sorry, let me just skip back a second. She's the expert. She clearly doesn't view these results as the basis for anything like a murder inquiry. That fact then has to raise the question of why Dr. Brearey chose to do so, while appearing to hide the fact that the hospital had been advised by the expert 30 months before to look into the possible presence of synthetic insulin in the child, and further, how a murder case, or an attempted murder case in this case, as a gateway into a serial killer case, came to be built on those readings. A final point, is there a possibility that the lack of any forensic footprint from the 4th and 5th of August 2015 could have been identified by the investigations team, the joint investigation team of police and consultants from the Countess of Chester in February of 2018? Could they have identified the absence of a forensic footprint as their joker in the case, in that it gave them a freer hand and greater scope for creativity in making their case against Miss Letby? Was that maybe something they identified as enhancing their prospects of success, as ultimately proved to be the case? Anyway, I know that was a little bit hard to follow at times, and occasionally a bit all over the place. But I hope that I thought it worth doing, and I hope that that some of you will get something from it. I just think it can't be ignored. And certainly, I think it has to be worth pointing up how Dr. Brearey's documented on national television arguments, the one being that he was the one who first identified that that these two readings, the insulin reading versus the C-peptide reading, represented an attempted a possible poisoning, or a definite poisoning. Essentially his claim that he was the first one to pick up on that as an anomaly, yeah. And secondly, the related one, that he he then tells the police that this is conclusive evidence of a poisoner being at work, whereas you have primary documented evidence contemporaneous with the child's stay at the hospital, refuting both of those. I just think I don't know where things are going to go, but I just think it's important for people to have that kind of stuff in there. It's important for that kind of such a glaring, I don't even know what to call it, but something like that. I just think it's important for as many people to have it in their mind as possible. Anyway, thanks for watching. As I said, I hope some of you got something from it. I felt it was worth doing because I put a lot of work in digesting this and writing it up. So on that basis, I thought, well, I could share it so that the work wouldn't go to waste. And as I said, I think it's interesting. Feel by all means, pick and choose. Mind you, if you've got this far, you've probably watched the whole thing. So congratulations. Anyway, thanks again and all the best. Bye.